Most people think their home is their sanctuary, a place to unwind, disconnect from the chaos, and just breathe. But for Chief Mark Reynolds, that illusion shattered the moment he turned onto his quiet suburban street just past midnight. After surviving a brutal 12-hour shift full of back-to-back calls, emergency situations, paperwork stacks that never ended, and the mental exhaustion that came with running an entire police department, Mark was done. All he wanted was a steaming hot shower, a cold drink, and 8 glorious hours of uninterrupted sleep. But the second his headlights swept across his driveway, his night took a hard left into the absurd. A massive tow truck was sitting squarely across the entrance to his home, completely blocking his way in. For a split second, he thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe one of the neighbors had car trouble. Maybe someone broke down and used his driveway as a temporary tow zone. But then, he saw him. Standing there with a smug smirk, arms folded and clipboard in hand, was Kevin. Not a cop, not a city worker. Kevin, the self-proclaimed HOA enforcer. The guy who strutted through the neighborhood like he wore a badge, even though his only real authority came from fine print in a neighborhood handbook nobody actually read. Kevin, the man Mark had heard stories about, the one who fined a retiree for having non-compliant wind chimes, and once threatened to tow a teenager's car for parking too close to a curb. Tonight, Kevin stood like a cartoon villain, bathed in orange streetlight, oozing petty satisfaction. Mark's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. Not tonight. He didn't have the patience for whatever little game this was. He stepped out, the weight of exhaustion dragging at his shoulders, badge still clipped to his hip. He didn't even bother with pleasantries. "You want to move this truck out of my driveway?" he asked, voice calm but firm. Kevin didn't move, didn't even blink. He just looked Mark up and down, eyes scanning like he was assessing a stranger, not the chief of police. "Should have paid the fine, bud," Kevin said with a tilt of the head toward the now empty space where Mark's car had been parked earlier that morning. Mark's pulse quickened. His car was gone. Towed. For a moment he thought Kevin was bluffing, trying to push his buttons. But the creeping realization hit hard. Kevin was dead serious. His vehicle had been removed from his own property, and he had no clue why. "For what?" he asked, disbelief coating every word. Kevin chuckled, flipping the clipboard like it held the Constitution. "Unpaid fine. $79. Mark blinked. "79? Kevin nodded. "Yup, we sent the notices. No payment. No warning needed when you ignore those." Mark pulled out his phone, scrolling through the clutter of work emails, spam, and daily nonsense. And there it was. An email from the HOA. Subject line in bold. Final notice. Urgent. Past due balance. $79. Sent just 3 hours ago. The rage simmered under the surface, but he didn't let it out. Instead, he looked up at Kevin, who was still wearing that smirk like a badge of honor. Behind him, the tow truck driver leaned casually against his rig, looking half bored and half curious. "Where's my car?" Mark asked flatly. "Impound lot," Kevin said. "You can get it back for $250. Plus storage fees." Mark's temple throbbed. "So let me get this straight. You towed my car over a $79 fine before I even had a chance to read the email, then blocked my driveway with this circus truck." Kevin nodded, smile widening. "That about sums it up." Mark cracked his neck slowly, mentally restraining himself. He'd dealt with cartel smugglers and violent felons with more decency than this man-child in khakis. "Move the truck," he said, his tone still even. But Kevin lifted a hand like he was some traffic god. "Oh, I can't do that. You gotta settle the fine first. It's policy." That word, policy, hit a nerve. Mark pulled out his phone again, dialing a number from memory. A young officer answered on the second ring. "Dispatch, this is Reynolds. I need a traffic obstruction unit at my residence. Kevin's smirk faltered. Whoa, whoa, what are you doing? Getting your truck moved, legally. The tow truck driver straightened, his eyes darting to Mark's hip. Wait, are you really a cop? Kevin scoffed. Doesn't matter. This is HOA jurisdiction. Cops can't do squat. Mark just stared at him, letting the silence stretch. That's cute, he muttered. He walked over to his mailbox, flipped it open, and found the dreaded physical notice, as predictable as it was infuriating. He skimmed the document, eyebrows rising with every line. Effective immediately. Additional violations totaling $500. Lawn not in uniform, HOA standards. Improperly installed porch light. Unauthorized mailbox decor. Mark glanced over at his perfectly trimmed lawn, the soft, warm porch light that barely illuminated the driveway, and finally the plain black mailbox, unadorned except for one thing, a tiny blue sticker that read, Support Police. That's what triggered a fine? That little sticker? Kevin was enjoying himself too much. Oh yeah, you've got more stacking up, buddy. This is just the start. You homeowners think you run the place, but we do. Mark turned back toward him slowly, expression unreadable. You run this neighborhood? Kevin nodded, arms crossed. That's right, so you better play by the rules. Mark let out a long, slow breath. Got it. Kevin, confident again, added with a smirk. Now if you want, I can waive some of the additional fines. If you pay tonight. Mark held up a hand. Don't bother. Then he leaned against his car and waited. What are you? Kevin began, but the sound of sirens interrupted him. Moments later, red and blue lights washed over the quiet street. Two fully uniformed officers stepped out of their patrol car. The senior officer, Sergeant Miller, approached, looking puzzled. Chief, what's going on? Kevin's face went pale. Chief? Mark crossed his arms. Did I forget to mention that I'm chief of police? The smugness evaporated from Kevin's face like morning mist. The tow truck driver froze mid-step. Mark pointed at the truck. This vehicle is obstructing my property. I'd like it removed immediately. Miller turned to Kevin. You got a permit for this tow? Kevin stammered. It's HOA policy, sir. Miller raised an eyebrow. Policy isn't law. You have no legal authority to impound a vehicle without following city ordinance. Mark turned his gaze back to Kevin, sharp and unflinching. You were saying something earlier, about running this neighborhood. Kevin's mouth opened, then closed. He had nothing. The silence that followed was delicious. For the first time that night, Mark allowed himself the hint of a smirk. The moment Richard Vore stepped out of his sleek black SUV, Mark felt the air shift. This wasn't just a petty power play anymore. It was an attempted show of dominance. Richard moved with that brand of polished arrogance only men used to unchecked authority possess. Dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, tie knotted with precision, he had the air of a politician who thought he owned the room before he even stepped inside. He walked up slowly, surveying the scene with calm detachment, as if he wasn't arriving at a rapidly unraveling disaster of his own making. Chief Reynolds, he said with a thin smile, I didn't expect to see you here in uniform. Mark didn't return the pleasantry. Didn't expect to have my driveway blocked and my car stolen either, he said, eyes hard. Richard gave a faint chuckle, the kind designed to diffuse tension while asserting control. This is all a misunderstanding, I'm sure. Our HOA has the right to enforce community standards after all. Mark raised an eyebrow. And I'm sure towing a car before the notice is read, then stacking on phantom violations like a rigged carnival game, falls right under those standards. Richard didn't flinch. Every homeowner is subject to the same rules. If you received fines, then you were in violation. It's nothing personal. Mark motioned to Sergeant Miller, who stepped forward with a folder. That's so. Then you won't mind if we take a quick look at your own record. Let's see if the HOA president is living as squeaky clean as he expects everyone else to. Richard's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Mark flipped open the report and read with deliberate clarity. Unapproved backyard structure. Overgrown hedges. Porch light not up to HOA standard. Unauthorized flag display. He raised an eyebrow. Sound familiar? Richard's jaw tightened. Kevin's eyes went wide. Wait. He's got violations. I thought... Mark cut him off with a sharp look. Oh, Kevin, you thought you were part of some noble crusade. Turns out you were just the puppet. He pulls the strings, and you dance. Kevin's face turned a shade paler, clipboard trembling in his hand. He said everything was legit, that the board had legal backing. Mark stepped closer. Let me explain something to both of you. HOA policy does not override state law. You cannot tow vehicles without proper authority. You cannot issue fines for fabricated violations. And you damn sure cannot use your position to extort your own neighbors. At that moment, the younger officer returned with a grim expression. The tow company's operating on an expired permit. They've been illegally towing vehicles for over 6 months. Mark's smirk widened. That, gentlemen, is a crime. The tow truck driver visibly panicked, holding up his hands. Hey, I didn't know, I just drive the truck. Mark pointed toward him. Then I suggest you cooperate, fast. Where's my car? The driver scrambled for his phone. Calling the lot now, they'll bring it back. It's on the way, I swear. Kevin looked like he wanted to melt into the pavement. Richard, however, was trying to keep his cool. Chief, I'm sure we can handle this internally. No need to escalate. Mark chuckled darkly. Oh, I think escalation's long overdue. You've been targeting homeowners, exploiting power, using policy as a weapon. You fine people for bird feeders and porch lights, while your own property looks like a yard sale behind closed doors. Richard's lips pressed into a tight line. Careful, Chief. I know people. Mark didn't flinch. Yeah? So do I. He gestured toward the two officers. And they're not fond of fraud. The fraud investigator and city inspector arrived minutes later, approaching with a sense of finality that made Kevin visibly gulp. Richard looked over, brow furrowing, still trying to hold his ground. Who are they? The inspector adjusted his glasses and flipped open a thick folder. Mr. Vore, we've received several complaints regarding HOA financial misconduct, selective enforcement, and unlawful property seizure. Based on preliminary evidence, we're launching an official audit of your HOA's financial records. Richard took a slow step back. You need a warrant. The inspector smiled coolly. Actually, we don't. As a non-profit operating under state charter, your HOA is subject to random and complaint-based audits. And tonight, Mr. Vore, you've triggered both. Mark leaned in slightly. Surprised? You shouldn't be. The moment the fraud investigator stepped out of the HOA office holding a fat stack of printed documents, the energy shifted again. The papers weren't just reports. They were receipts, ledgers, bank statements, and transfer logs. The smoking gun. The investigator held one up. Mr. Vore, would you like to explain why HOA fine money was transferred to a personal account under your name? Richard blanched. That's an accounting error. Mark laughed. Sure it is. Thousands of dollars deposited into your account by mistake. Happens to the best of us, right? The investigator continued flipping through papers like he was reading a script at a dramatic unveiling. HOA funds used for a vacation home in Florida. Payments on a luxury vehicle. Steakhouse tabs. Oh, and my personal favorite, an $800 dinner charged as community relations. The neighbors, who had gathered slowly during the commotion, gasped. Mrs. Jenkins shook her head in disbelief. I got fined $500 for planting tulips, and he's out here eating Wagyu on our dime. Mr. Patel's jaw clenched. He threatened to foreclose on my house over a fence that was 2 inches too high. Mark turned to Richard, voice low. You really made enemies out of the wrong people. Richard's posture crumbled, and Kevin, still in cuffs, turned toward him with panic. Wait, you told me this was all legal. You said the board approved everything. Mark crossed his arms. And now, Kevin, you have a decision to make. You want to take the fall for all of this? Or do you want to start talking? Kevin stammered. I didn't plan any of this. Richard made all the calls. Richard hissed. Don't be stupid, Kevin. Mark ignored the outburst. Sergeant, what kind of deal can the DA offer if Kevin cooperates? Miller shrugged. Depends on what he gives us, but significant if he talks. Kevin looked like a man balancing over a pit. I want a lawyer, but yeah, I'll cooperate. Richard snapped. You traitor. Mark smiled coolly. Oops, there goes the loyalty. Richard's mask cracked as panic truly set in. You think you've won, Reynolds. You're just a cop. You can't touch the HOA board. Mark didn't blink. You had power because no one stood up to you. Guess what? I just did. As more neighbors poured out onto the street, phones in hand, recording, whispering, watching, the tide turned. Richard Vore, once the untouchable king of the neighborhood, was exposed, and it was far from over. The inspector spoke up again. Due to the scale of financial irregularities and citizen complaints, we're recommending a temporary suspension of all HOA operations, pending a formal hearing. Kevin, now visibly sweating, was loaded into a cruiser. Richard stood paralyzed as the investigator approached again. We're also opening a personal investigation into you, Mr. Vore, for embezzlement and financial fraud. You should prepare for a full audit of your personal and business finances. The man had no words left. Mark stepped forward, snapping the cuffs on. Richard Vore, you're under arrest for financial fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of power. Cheers erupted from the crowd. Neighbors clapped. Some shouted. Others just stared, stunned but relieved. Mrs. Jenkins pumped her fist in the air. Kevin, still in cuffs, muttered, Man, this is better than TV. Richard hissed through his teeth as he was led away. This isn't over. Mark smirked. Yeah. See you in court. The next few days moved fast. The HOA office was shut down. Red investigation in progress signs plastered on the windows. Vaughan's board members resigned in disgrace, one by one. Kevin, desperate to save himself, gave up everything. The financial records, the hidden blacklist of homeowners they'd targeted, even the names of other HOAs running similar scams. It was the final nail in the coffin. And then, an unexpected email arrived in Mark's inbox. Subject line, HOA property seizure update. The content? Richard Vaughan's beach house in Florida, bought with stolen HOA funds, had been auctioned. The winning bid came from a coalition of neighbors, led by Mrs. Jenkins and Mr. Patel. Mark blinked. Then he laughed so hard he nearly dropped his coffee. That weekend, the neighborhood held a bonfire. They burned the ridiculous rulebooks, the stacks of violation notices, and one particularly large campaign poster of Richard Vaughan. Jim, the retired Marine, tossed in his overdue lawn notice with a grin. Mrs. Jenkins roasted marshmallows over the flames. Mark watched the fire, hands on his hips, taking in the crackle, the laughter, the relief that hung in the air. The tyranny was over. But it didn't end there. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages poured in from homeowners across the state, then the country. Stories of abuse, overreach, unjust fines, intimidation. People were desperate, looking for help, looking for hope. Mark scrolled through dozens of messages, all saying the same thing. Our HOA is just as bad. What can we do? He leaned back, opened his social media, and began typing. Is your HOA corrupt? Have you been fined for ridiculous reasons? Tell me your story. Let's bring these power-hungry tyrants down, together. He hit post. Within minutes, it exploded with responses. And Mark Reynolds knew one thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning.